Now that the 53-man roster is set, we're going to be talking about the key takeaways, and we're also going to be looking at why the Washington Commanders could be looking to make some more moves. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, just like Jaden Daniels is going to be hitting Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Zach Ertz, and many others for multiple touchdowns this upcoming season. And so in exchange for hitting that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Washington Commanders. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Washington Commanders Insider family as we talk nothing but Washington Commanders football. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it. And let's start with the key takeaways from the 53-man roster. And so we're going to be looking at the surprises, the cuts, and players that could possibly be on the practice squad for the Washington Commanders. And so let's start at the quarterback position. And I think that the quarterback position really ended up just like a lot of us thought it would. So you have Jaden Daniels clearly as QB number 1. You have Marcus Mariota at QB number 2. And then Josh Johnson was QB number 3. And so to me, I think that Josh Johnson outplayed Sam Hartman. And I talked about this before with Josh Johnson. I just like his experience and just really what he brings to the team. And so not shocked that he made the team. And so the Commanders are going with these 3 quarterbacks moving forward. And so next, looking at the running backs. And so I think that this also really kind of ended up like a lot of us thought. And so you have Austin Eckler, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Jeremy McNichols, and Chris Rodriguez Jr. Those are going to be the 4 running backs moving forward with the Washington Commanders. And so I think that this is something that we all thought as well. Now, I think it gets interesting when you get to the wide receiver room, because the Washington Commanders decided to go with just 5 receivers here. And so they go with Terry McLaurin, they go with Deebo Samuel, Jalen Lane, Noah Brown, and Luke McCaffrey. And so this is where I thought the Commanders would at least go with another wide receiver. You know, I just think that this is something where in the preseason, you just wonder if a player does go down, you know, do you have somebody else that can kind of step in here? And so, you know, starting with just Noah Brown in that situation. And so Noah Brown, I definitely think that he showed really just he can be a major contributor last season. The only issue was he went down with injury. And so unfortunately, you know, coming into the mandatory minicamp, he got hurt and we didn't get a chance to see him really out there. And so the last reports, they look great, you know, just showing him in the clips and then also to the write-ups and stuff like that. It sounds like Noah Brown is trending in the right direction. But I just think that you have to be concerned that if Noah Brown does go down, you do need, I think, another wide receiver out there just in case to possibly slide in there. And then next, you know, the next thing to kind of circle with this group is just the experience. And so when you look at Jalen Lane, I thought that he looked very well here during the preseason. And I think he's definitely going to be a player that is trending in the right direction, you know, but if it is a slow start for him, I think that you want to have another wide receiver just in case that he gets off to a slow start. And the same for Luke McCaffrey, because I thought that Luke McCaffrey was going to show us a little bit more in preseason, but you do continue to hear about how much of a competitor he is. And you continue to hear about how he's ready to just step in now as a wide receiver, understanding, you know, where to be, making the adjustments and understanding, you know, hey, this is what the quarterback is looking for and things like that. And so now, you know, with this situation and bringing back Terry McLaurin, perhaps Luke McCaffrey slides into a little bit more of a natural fit into the offense, and we see him really take off here in week 1. And so let's see what happens, you know, with the experience and then also too with the injury concerns. And lastly, here's another thing that you just have to consider with just going with 5 wide receivers. And so Terry McLaurin is a gamer. I'm always betting on Terry McLaurin, but Terry McLaurin has had a long layoff here. And so he hasn't been in the pads. He's been on the PUP list and everything else. And we've been hearing him ramping up and stuff like that. And yes, he's got the deal done. And I talked about this in yesterday's video. You now have 12 days to get him ready to go. And so you have to wonder, is he going to be ready for the max amount of snaps? Is he going to be just ready to play that much football early on? Because if not, you got to think about, okay, it could be more rotations that you have to throw at defenses and stuff like that. And so that's something that you wonder about with just going with the 5 wide receivers. But I think that Ja'Cory Brooks is probably the surprise for me. I thought that he was better than the other wide receivers out there, and hopefully he does get to the practice squad. And so the next thing, looking at the tight ends, and so Zach Ertz, John Bates, Ben Sinnott, and then you also too have Colson Yankoff. And so I thought that Colson Yankoff was going to be in the mix. I thought that he was a guy that, man, you're betting on the upside with him. And I just knew that the Washington Commanders at some point, you're going to have to make moves where you're betting on the upside. And I think that that is exactly what you're doing with Colson Yankoff. And so let's see what happens here with him. And I think that Ben Sinnott, look, he's really got to step up this season. I just really think that he has got to take a step forward. Let's see what happens. Right now, he is going to be one of the 4 that are moving forward at the tight end position. And so with the offensive linemen, I think that this is pretty much something that also ended up somewhat the way that I think a lot of people were thinking. And so Laramie Tunsil, Brandon Coleman, Tyler Biotis, you have Nick Allegretti, you have Andrew Wally, you have Josh Conley Jr., Chris Paul, George Faint, and Trent Scott. And just looking at George Faint, I can remember one of the things that Dan Quinn had talked about was just being excited that he was actually going to hit the practice squad. Chris Paul, I think, is a guy that had been making some noise here. So I'm not surprised at the fact that he's going to get an opportunity here with this offensive line. And honestly, I think that the offensive line is in a good position. And what I like about them and the camp that they had is really they got tested because Brandon Coleman was out and they had to do a little bit of shuffling there. And then also, too, you have Josh Conley Jr., who was kind of rotating in and everything else. But, man, I think Josh Conley Jr. is like ready to just – I personally think he's ready to just start there, but let's see what happens with that. We definitely think that, for the most part, he's going to come in on a rotational basis. But, man, I think he looked awfully good out there. And so offensive line there. When you look at the defensive line, I think that this is where some would say you probably have a little bit of a surprise, especially with one of the cuts that the Washington Commanders made here. And I think that, some people look at this and they go, okay, they thought maybe Farrell was going to continue on with this team, but they went ahead and cut him. And so he's not going to be there. And so when you look at the defensive line and just looking across the board what they have, so Dietrich Wise Jr., look, I think he's ready to certainly be a huge contributor for this team, a guy that comes in with a ton of experience, didn't question it. Deron Payne, we've been hearing about him as a leader, ready to step up, and I think it is time now. We get into week 1. Let's see exactly, the type of season that Deron Payne is ready to have. And then with Javon Kinlaw, he's one of the guys that I just cannot wait to see out there because we've been seeing a little bit of the power and the drills and stuff like that. And so I cannot wait to see what we see in games with that, and also to his versatility. Jacob Martin, to me, I think he's a guy that a lot of people have been sleeping on, and I think Jacob Martin is going to show up here starting week 1. Johnny Newton, he's definitely a player I'm super excited for because now it seems like he's had a much better camp coming off the foot injury from a year ago, and so he looks like that he's into some great shape and he's ready to go. Dorrance Armstrong, he makes it. Then you have Javante Jean-Baptiste, which is a player I talked about in yesterday's video. I wanted to see the Commanders continue on with him, and so he makes it. And then Eddie Goldman. And so let's see what happens with Eddie Goldman. I think he still has a lot left in the tank. And I think he's one of those guys, too, that we just see how, Joe Witt Jr. is going to use him in the defense and everything else. And so hopefully he can eat up space, keep our linebackers clean, and just other players to kind of come up and make some plays. But let's see how that shakes out. And so next, looking at the linebackers, I think that this is probably where you look at this situation and you say this is probably a surprise keep. And so you have Von Miller, we have Bobby Wagner, Jordan McGee, Kane Madrano, Frankie Louvu, Nick Bellore, and then you have Ali Cajo. And so I think that Ali Cajo is a guy that, to me, came on late. I think that he played very well at the end in the preseason, and I think that he really started to come on towards the end. And, I think he was right there maybe on the bubble, but he's on there. And so he's on the 53. Nick Bellore is a guy that I said, look, special teams ace. I think that you have to find a way to keep him. Kane Madrano, I think coming into the season, a lot of people were like, I don't really think he's going to make too much noise or really do anything. But I think that when Jordan McGee went down, it kind of opened the door for Kane Madrano. And he's one of the guys that I look at and I say, okay, I think he really took the opportunity that was given to him, and I think he ran with it. And so Kane Madrano, I think you're going to see some more of that. this season. Let's see if Jordan McGee can really show, the flash and the promise that this team is looking for. And so both of those players are going to be interesting at the linebacker position, but the Commanders going with 7 there. Cornerback position, this is going to be very interesting, and we're going to talk about that towards the end here in the next segment. But you have Marshawn Lattimore, you have Trey Amos, you have Mikey Sammerstill, Jonathan Jones, and then you have Noah Igbinoghene there at the end. And so you got the experience with Noah, and then also too Jonathan Jones. I think that they are definitely going to, provide a little bit of an insurance, I think, if something does happen with Marshawn Lattimore, or you get off to a slow start here with Trey Amos, which I don't think that that's going to happen. And Marshawn Lattimore, look, I think that he comes into this season, he's in terrific shape. He knows the defense, and he's not dealing with that hamstring. I'm betting on the fact that he gets closer to what he was when he was with the Saints. And I think that Trey Amos, look, he's one of those guys that he just seems like he's come in and he's just not a rookie. It seems like he's been in the league for 2-3 years. Now let's see what happens when week 1 starts and everything else. Let's see if he adapts and just really is able to kind of course correct a lot of what maybe Mikey Sammerstill did. And so let's see what that learning curve looks like. And so I love that with him, and then Jonathan Jones and the experience that you get with Noah Igbinoghene. And so at the safety, you got 5. You got Will Harris, Quan Martin, Percy Butler, Jeremy Reeves, and Tyler Owens. And so Tyler Owens, that was the guy that, I thought, okay, he's one of the players that I wanted to see the Commanders continue to roll with. And I think that he's one of those guys that you look at and it's more of an upside bet. And so I think that, you're banking on the fact that he's going to get to that upside and be a versatile defender. And so let's see if he can kind of develop into that a little bit more this season. So I do like the fact that they kept him. Your special teams, you got Tress Way, Tyler Ott, Matt Gay, just looking at your 3 specialists right there. And so, that's how the roster really shook out. When it comes down to players that I do want to see, this team kind of continue to maybe, I guess, bring back on the practice squad and everything else. And so I think at the running back position, one of the players that I want to see the Commanders bring back here is going to be Demetric Felton. I would love to see them bring him back, either him or Kaz Allen. I just think that from a special teams standpoint, and then, if you're not getting what you want from your running backs here, maybe you go with a guy that has had some experience. And so I think that he definitely should be a player that comes back. And then also two players that I certainly think should be back, and I think that they could become very important here. So like I said, we're going to go into the last segment, but Antonio Hamilton, and then also Carlin Viggers. I think that both of these guys are players that I think they for sure caught Dan Quinn's eye and Joe Wood Jr.'s eye. Like, I do think that they look at Carlin Viggers as a player that they would like to maybe stick around on the practice squad. Maybe he develops into something. And I think that Antonio Hamilton, one of the things that Dan Quinn talked about was just he liked how he came on towards the end. And so that leads me to just really the next portion of the show and why these guys could be important. And so this right here is the latest around Noah Igbinoghene, and with him possibly being on the trading block. And so this is something that I saw on Commander's Wire, and it's in a lot of places right now. And so if you go check out this particular article, what you're going to see in there is they're talking about it, but you also see a tweet here from an NFL insider here, and it's Diana Russacini, and she's the Athletics senior NFL insider. And within this tweet, this is what it says. And so, again, going to this article, you could read it for yourself, but it says the Commanders have been gauging multiple teams' interest in cornerback Noah Igbinoghene. Sources say Igbinoghene, a Dolphins 2020 first-round pick, can provide secondary depth for teams looking to add to their cornerback rooms. And so, look, man, I mean, if that's true, then that means for sure that Antonio Hamilton and then also Carlin Viggers might be players that could be coming back to the Washington Commanders. And when you look at the fact that they could be shopping him, I wonder what type of draft picks you would get back from him, because I definitely think that this would be a situation that you would be looking to get some draft capital back. And we know that with Adam Peters, he's always looking to add to this football team. And so if this is true, again, this is something that was written. It's obviously a rumor, with the fact that maybe Noah Igbinoghene is on the trade block here. I'm sure we'll find out some more things as time goes along. But, it just with the way that the corners are set up too, he's one of the guys that I think you would be depending on as far as the experience. And so if you're trading him, again, I mean, I just think that you have belief in what you could possibly bring back, either be a free agency or, you have somebody in mind that you're saying, okay, well, we're going to move on here and maybe we're opening up the spot for them. And so I think that this is a situation definitely worth kind of monitoring here. And let's see if the Washington Commanders are going to make a trade now that they've gotten down to 53 here. And so that's a Noah Igbinoghene. And again, if you guys want to read this, you can go over to Commanders Wire. And I'll say this before we jump out of here, as far as the Commanders and possibly making some more moves, we have to also think about this, that the entire NFL had to cut down to 53. And so there are lots of players with lots of film that have done a lot of good things that I'm sure the Commanders have already taken a look at, because maybe they were looking at them in the draft, or, maybe they were looking at adding them and just didn't necessarily get to it. But there's still the potential that the Commanders could bring in some talent here. We know that Adam Peters is just going to turn every stone possible over to make this team be, a contender and get to the championship and hopefully win this thing. And so let's see what happens if the Commanders are going to add somebody via free agency. And also, too, I think that that's something to think about with the wide receiver room as well. Like maybe that is something that they're looking to do, is move a player and then bring like a veteran player over via the wide receiver room. So let's see how this thing shakes out. So you guys let me know in the comments, are the Washington Commanders going to make another move before week 1? And then let me know what your key takeaways were from the 53-man roster cut down. Again, we'll find out a little bit more with the practice squad, I believe, in the next day or so, what that's going to look like. And so, was there any key takeaways, from the players that got cut, or, surprise players? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. And so, look, as we always say, go Commanders. And look, we will see you on the next one. All right. Peace.